Hey, welcome everybody. It is What's Up, No Learn Fly, all the way here from AOPA headquarters, and as we'll find out, a remote location in the southern United States. It is this month's episode is It's a Water World. Why not get your seaplane rating? So I want to welcome you all here. But before we get started in earnest, let's make sure that we talk a little bit about just the basic controls for the folks that may not be familiar. If you are on a computer, you're going to see something like this, the menu like this. So if you have a question, you're looking for that little cartoon type bubble with the question mark in it, type your question in the box where it says ask the staff a question and make sure you hit that send button, because if you don't hit the send button, we won't see it. If you're on a tablet, you're looking for the little question mark that looks just like this, type your question, and again, make sure you hit the send button. All right, as always, my name is Chris Moser. I'm here from AOPA. I work at AOPA to support flight schools and CFIs. And with me, after an absence of maybe a month or so, is our good friend, Dan Justman. Say hello, Dan.
Hello, Dan. Ooh, we stole that one. We used it up
Yeah,
earlier. That's right. Let's
don't
go
worry.
back to it.
We'll keep
I like
going.
to think this has been a short hiatus, but I'm pleased to be back. Hello, everyone. Dan Justman, Vice President of You Can Fly. I'm an instrument-rated private pilot and AOPA member for nearly 25 years. I am proud to be able to lead the AOPA Foundation and You Can Fly programs and the amazing teams that bring them to life each and every day. I am happy to introduce, as a special guest today, another one of those amazing team members, Mr. Jamie Beckett.
Hey, how are you? It's truly a pleasure to be here. I do like it. And as Chris said, I am the representative of the Southeast. I am a Floridian, and I can prove it because I'm currently not wearing shoes.
Excellent. I love it. Great to have you here today, Jamie. Thanks for joining us. I'm also pleased to welcome our behind the scenes guy, Stephen Schroeder. Say hello, Stephen.
Well, hello, Stephen.
There you go.
And hello, Florida man.
There's Florida man.
That's always Florida man. Always a pleasure. So coordinator of the Flight Train Initiative. I work directly with Chris doing a lot of behind the scenes work. It's always been a pleasure with all the variety of things I get to do here, including producing this webinar on a monthly basis.
Very cool. And then Dan, tell us a little bit about the foundation.
I will. Well, as the philanthropic arm of AOPA, the AOPA Foundation is supported by thousands of generous donors. So that's individuals and organizations and businesses. Because of their desire to foster a love and passion for aviation and others, we are able to fund and develop and execute initiatives and programs that grow and support general aviation and aviation safety. So if you too would like to see general aviation thrive here in the United States, we would encourage you to become a donor too. And to do that, find out more, please visit aopafoundation.org.
All right. And we know the most asked questions, Dan, are right here on the slide.
Well, two of the three are here. I'm not going to mention the third because we know where that's
we're not mentioning that one.
No. So Wings credit, thanks. With partnership with the FAA, we are able to provide Wings credit for this webinar. Of course, it's only if you're viewing live. All that you need to do to earn Wings credit is to be here with us on this live broadcast and have registered with your FAAsafety.gov email address. If you're not sure if you've used that address, please use that link there. I think actually Stephen's going to put it in the chat with everyone, or the questions if he hasn't already done so. I'm not going to spell that out for you. I'll never get it right, but please look in the questions piece for that link. Just shoot a little note there and we'll pick it up, make sure that we've got the right address for you. For any other questions that come up, please email us at ftinitiative@aopa.org. And the second most asked question is, this was really cool. This was really interesting, but I want to find out more. I got to go watch this again and see what Jamie said about this or that. Well, you can do that on either YouTube or at webinars@aopa.org on our What's Up playlist, either one of those channels. You can watch it over and over and over again as much as you would like. That will be posted in a few days.
Yeah, because we definitely want to know, what did Jamie say?
You're right. That's all I have for now. But Stephen, did we mention that was supposed to be seamless?
There we go. And yeah. And this day in 1918, the first airmail service begins with regular flights between DC and New York. Initially operated by the United States Army Signal Corps, it was taken over later. by different organizations, obviously. And urban myth, I think you shared with me, Jamie, was that first flight they got lost on the way.
That's the story.
Good thing
And
they
the
use a
new
signal corps.
and the new
Well, I
urban
think,
myth, Stephen, too. You said that also. What happened the next day because they got lost? We had
Oh yeah, your first postal insurance was invented.
Brilliant.
Alas.
GPS wasn't nearly as reliable back then.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what's on the menu for today. So what's on the checklist we're going to talk a little bit about why you should get a seaplane rating. And of course, we're really happy to have Jamie here with us because Jamie is an experienced seaplane instructor, among other things. He's also got lots of other instructional experience as well. We're going to learn a little bit about the skills and how the skills you'll learn and how it will help your flying. So I know there's a big myth that we want to definitely bust today, and that's what Jamie's going to help us with. A little bit of history, the requirements of getting that seaplane rating. We'll talk very briefly about some basic systems that are specific to seaplanes, your typical training, what that's going to look like. And then, of course, we'll talk just some really high level about pre-flight taxiing, takeoffs, landings, post-flight procedures, just some of the things that you'll be doing in that training. And, of course, performance considerations. So we're going to do hopefully a pretty good broad overview. But as we mentioned before, Jamie, too, or as we were talking about as we were prepping, I should say, we're going to keep it broad because, of course, we don't know what kind of seaplane they're going to fly. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and beyond that, even, are you in a lake? Are you in a river? Are you out in the ocean? Things change a little bit depending on, do you have current? Do you have big waves? So yeah, it's a generic look at seaplanes and why it's worth getting that training. And spoiler alert, it really is.
All right. So let's get right into it. The first part is, why should we get a seaplane rating? Like, why bother with this if I've already got my pilot certificate and something else?
You know, there is a common belief out there that getting a seaplane rating is kind of a vanity thing. It adds it to my certificate, but you're never going to be able to rent one, and that's actually not entirely true, but it is true in a lot of places. But you've got a glider add-on, and many of us go get tail dragger sign-offs, which we don't have to do, but we seek it out. What you learn flying a glider, what you learn doing tail dragger training, is directly applicable to what you do in a tricycle gear aircraft, whether that's a single or a twin. Flying seaplanes is the same thing. There are all kinds of little tidbits of information about energy management or keeping an eye on the wind or just the environment I'm in that really can help you when you're flying land planes. And I am one of those people that waited years before getting my seaplane rating because, you know, the seaplane base for me is on the other side of the airport. It's almost a whole mile away. So
That's
it
a long way, yeah.
took me a while to get motivated, but you know, it really does change everything about how you look at flying from startup all the way through tie down at the end. I think it's absolutely worth it.
And I would totally agree. And not to mention the fact, too, that as we were discussing and brainstorming, getting ready for this, the other part is, as you mentioned, the Earth is 71% water. We have all these runways, but you specifically mentioned, too, the way to take advantage of all of those places is the Seaplane Pilots Association. Could you just describe that to the audience a little bit?
Yeah, Seaplane Pilots Association is a really interesting group because they specialize in that. So they have a website, they have a guide with all the rules for all the different states, because unlike aviation, which is all federally controlled, lakes and waterways are controlled by states.
Mhm.
So there are states where you can't do seaplane activities, and there are states where it's wide open, just go for it. But as with anything, it's almost like a type club. Having association with an organization that is really steeped in the knowledge of that particular thing makes all the difference in the world.
And they've got that guide apparently too that says
Yep.
where you can land, correct?
Yeah, and there are, I believe, New Jersey, you can't do seaplane activity. They don't go for it. Where I live in Florida, if there's a big enough puddle, go for it.
All right, very cool. And by the way, we do have a handout like we normally do. And so it does have links to a lot of the resources or some of the resources, a few AOPA articles and videos. I do have a link to the Seaplane Pilots Association on there, so you can go there and then look for their guide for all the different seaplane bases. And not to mention, the biggest source for me as I was prepping for this too was the FAA's manual. So check that out. Check out the handout. You can download it under the handout section. All right, let's get into this next bit here, which is you hinted at this, Jamie. You talked a little bit about, hey, there's this myth. It's not just a vanity thing. but you really you can get some skills that affect it. What are some of the specific things that you can learn from flying seaplanes that will help in all of your flying?
Well, if you're in a land plane, you've got rubber on asphalt or on grass, and you've got some friction there. And if you've got 5 knots of wind, we'll typically go, that's no big deal. I don't care. There are a lot of places, including my home airport, where we have a preferred runway. And if the winds are below 5, we use that runway regardless of the direction of the wind. In seaplanes, you'll become tremendously aware of where the wind is coming from. And 5 knots is a significant amount. It will move the airplane. And you do start to realize its tendency to weather vane is a blessing and a curse. It's easy to find the wind, just let go of everything and the airplane will point into it. But if you want to turn downwind, now you need to have a whole technique. So just that sort of thing. And of course, Chris, there's no brakes. As soon as the propeller turns, it starts moving. You really have to think ahead of the machine all the time, even at idle. You just can't just sit there and go cruising around the lake or the river. Water is moving, you're moving. There's all these forces at play. You become very aware of that, and that's good because you carry it with you into the land plane.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the things now, I admittedly, I'm not a seaplane pilot, which is why I wanted to have Jamie on, because he is the expert here with us. But one thing I remember reading about as I was prepping for this webinar too was that everything has to be planned. And they even talked about, as you're doing, and we'll talk later about landings and specifically, but everything has to be planned to the point where even when you're flying over, you're looking not only for where you're going to land, but even for where the taxiing, you're planning your taxi out too for obstacles. Yep. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, I mean, imagine a lake that's say 2 miles across, and there are thousands of those in the United States. I don't want to land at the first piece of water if my ramp is on the other side of the lake. I want to find a way to get over there, and I can step taxi, and that's all okay. But everything about this, even the checklists we use are different, and different schools use different things. I was taught using the night owl checklist, which I really like, NTOWL. So when I'm considering landing on a lake, I have to think, how's the noise going to affect the neighbors? Because let's face it, we can have a detrimental effect on the community if we make a lot of noise. Are there towers? Is there some kind of terrain, or is there traffic on the water or in the air that I have to consider? Are there obstructions both above and below the water? Sometimes you've got, you've been out in Arizona a bit. Here in Florida, we have lakes that disappear in the dry months and they come back in the wet months. There may be stumps or obstacles under the water. We want to make sure we fly over and take a good look at that. We do want to think about the wind and the water conditions. How strong is the wind? Where it's coming from? What's the water surface like? Do I have big waves or little waves? And what's my landing lane look like? Because if we've got a round lake, I've got 360 options for the direction I land in. Let's figure that out before we set up our approach, because I don't want to be crosswind or downwind if I can help it.
And that's one of the cool things I know we'll talk about coming up here in a little bit, is that idea of how to determine what the wind is doing. But that's a little hint. We're coming up soon on that. I know you really had some things. You're a big history lover. You had some cool tidbits here about seaplanes. So you want to tell us a little bit about that basic seaplane history that, oddly enough, or not oddly enough, but conveniently enough, took place in Florida.
Yeah, the first scheduled airline ever went from St. Pete, Florida to Tampa across the bay. And I'm very pleased to say my granddad's brother was there for it. He was a public official back then. That's the airplane, the Benoit, flown by Tony Janis. It was very expensive, but back then it was all sand roads. 1914, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure. You literally couldn't get from St. Pete to Tampa and back in the same day. So all of a sudden it opened up business opportunities. It only lasted 3 months, but it proved that it was possible. And if you look at newspapers from that era, suddenly late 1914, 1915, everybody wanted to have airline service. And of course, Pan American started in Florida. There's a little office over a restaurant in Key West where one trip started Pan Am, and it was just Key West to Havana, not a real long flight, but that became the biggest airline in the world at one point. And they started with seaplanes because back in the early 20th century, there were very few airports, but there was a lot of water. So you could go anywhere in the world if you were in a seaplane. You were very limited if you had a land plane.
Very cool. And So let's talk a little bit too about the requirements to become a seaplane pilot. So can you just run us through the basics of someone who we're assuming probably an add-on? I know you mentioned that it could be, you could do your initial training in it, but most folks don't do that. Most will do that probably in a land plane and then do the add-on. So you can tell us a little bit about how that works?
It's typically an add-on, yeah. And it's easier to do if you're current. If you haven't flown in 3 years or 5 years, you can get current again doing seaplane instruction, but it will take longer. I do have a teenager here in town who was one of my students years ago that I worked with the high school Aero club. He went to work at the seaplane base as a line guy. He's getting his initial training in a seaplane. He soloed a seaplane. So it can be done if that's where you live and what you want to do. It is, it's to proficiency, the training. There is no hour requirement. There's no written test. You just do your training, then you take a check ride. And it is fairly intensive training, very enjoyable, but it's fairly intensive because really there's no reason to get up into cruise. You're all dealing with taxiing, takeoffs, landings, safety considerations. So you might have 20 or 30 takeoffs and landings in a given lesson. It's a workout, but it's really fascinating to do.
So somewhat similar, it sounds like, to doing like a tailwheel endorsement. The part different, of course, being you have to take a check ride because you're adding on an airplane class. You have the category of airplane single or multi or whatever, but then you're adding on that class part for the C or whatever. But it sounds
And
like it's similar to
typically,
tailwheel training, right? Lots of
and
landings.
typically, I will say, you will at some point go up 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 feet to do a stall or two to get a feel for how the airplane reacts in that. Then we come down and we're doing takeoffs and landings, but with the knowledge of how does that stall look like and feel like? Because with those floats down there, we have a lot of extra weight. Our CG is lower than normal, and we have a bunch of extra drag when we're in the air. So you really want to know what that feels like.
Now, I do have a question that was emailed into us a few days ago from Jerry, so I just wanted to throw that out there in case Jerry's on the line here. And his question was basically that he hasn't had a medical nor basic med in over 10 years. He has only been exercising sport privileges. But he does have a commercial pilot certificate, and he wanted to add on the seaplane. So the question was, can he go take a check ride without a medical certificate or basic med to add on to his commercial? Can he do that?
Well, you always have the option of going and get the medical, but if you don't want to, you could exercise the sport pilot privileges of your commercial and go at a sport pilot seaplane. That would be acceptable. It's a little different in training and testing for sport pilot because there's no DPE required. Normally, Chris, if I'm your instructor, I'll instruct you, I'll sign you off, you'll go to the examiner for your check ride. As a sport pilot, I might be your instructor, then another instructor will do your check ride. No DPE required, but it's basically the same stuff because it is all takeoffs, taxis, landings. You know, it's not any of the cross country stuff. Obviously, there's no night flying. Very difficult to land on the water in the dark.
I read about that. It said to avoid that like big time. So yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to be very bold or in real trouble to need to do that.
And before obviously I think Dan might have a question, but let me just finish up with Jerry too. So Jerry, just to clarify as well, so if you did want to do that commercial add-on, you would need to get that medical, or you would have to find an examiner that might be willing to act as PIC for you. So anyway, go ahead, Dan. What's our question?
Well, great segue from seaplane flying at night and a recommendation not to, but a question came in early on. It says, where are there lighted seaplane bases? In the AIM 2-1-9, it says flashing yellow or flashing white yellow aerodrome beacons denote lighted water airport. Any idea where there could be some of those?
I've never seen one. I'm going to guess Alaska may have some, and there may be some military versions because the military has had seaplanes in the past. But in the civilian world, that would be pretty rare. It is possible to land a seaplane at night, but you do need good lighting. You do need specific training. Personal opinion, I would relate it to a Cat 3 landing in a transport category. It takes training and practice, and you've got to be current. That's not something you just want to take a whack at because your friend's on the opposite shore with his car headlights on. That's not going to work out.
Take a whack at might end in a whack. All right. So how about a little bit of overview of the types of seaplanes too that folks might come across as they're deciding to look into doing this or curious about it?
Well, the most common we'll generally find at seaplane training facilities is a land plane that's been retrofitted with floats, like you see there with the Cessna. Those are really common, and it really runs the gamut. There used to actually be a DC-3 down in Palm Beach on floats, and it was a monster when you put that up there. But almost anything can be put on floats, and certainly caravans, Cessna caravans are on floats and fly all over. There's also the hull style, which you've got the short Sunderland picture there, but they're really, the Icon A5 is a hull type of seaplane, slightly different techniques to use that, but equally fun, really enjoyable airplanes. And then there's the amphibious ones. And of course, amphibious aircraft have the highest insurance rates because you really got to be sure you don't fall into that gear down for landing. You sure this is a water landing? Let's
Right.
put those up. So there's two different landing checklists, and you got to make sure you're on the right one.
All right, very cool. Now, since we were talking a little bit there about the floats and everything else, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the different types of the basic systems here? What's something they should be aware of or that they're going to be learning more about when they go through training?
Well, I'm actually glad you used the word system because the float is a system. It's not just a pontoon made out of styrofoam with fiberglass around it. It's actually got to have at least 4 compartments. It's got to stay afloat, even if 2 of them flood. Each float has to be able to carry 90% of the aircraft at gross weight. So you have 180% flotation there. And they've got bulkheads in them, so they're segmented off, and that becomes part of our pre-flight. We pump out the floats because anything that goes in the water leaks, at least some, and you don't want to be taken off with extra weight in there. There's a variety of parts on there. On the bow, we have a bumper, generally made of rubber because you might bump into something. Yay, that's nice. Probably the biggest thing down in the center that most people don't get, there's a piece called the step, because the float is not like a canoe. It's actually curved and then it has a cut up. So when you're just sitting in the water, the entire float's in the water except for the very nose. But as you get going, for takeoff, we want to get on the step. So we've only got maybe a foot or 2 of the float is actually in the water. The aft section is above the water and the forward section has risen up. So we've only got a very small piece of it in the water, and learning how to get on the step, feel it, and hold that position is one of the skills you learn right away on your first takeoff. That's a big deal.
All right, cool. And then you mentioned too, what was the point with no suspension either? I imagine that has something to do with when you're coming to land, or?
Yeah, we're a little bit spoiled because whether you're flying an OJ3 Cub or whether you're flying a Cessna 172 with Land-O-Matic gear or whatever, there's some type of suspension system, the air in the tires, the bungees or the shock absorbers. Seaplanes have none of that. The float is attached directly to the hardware, which attaches directly to the aircraft. So if you land hard or if you land in really rough water improperly, all that energy transfers up into the airplane. It can damage the airplane, and you won't like it either. So it really is worth learning how to not knock your fillings out on landings.
So maybe that's one of the skills that transfers over, is maybe your flare gets a little bit better, a little easier and smoother.
Yeah. You really don't want to have a hard landing in a seaplane.
All right, cool. Let me go ahead and move to the next one here. All right, so typical training plan. This, of course, is just a super quick overview because we're going to go into detail about these different things as we move forward. But what are some of the things they can expect if they go to do that seaplane add-on?
Well, we're going to do the traditional passenger briefing, even though you're actually a pilot. You're still going to do a passenger briefing, but it's going to include things like flotation devices because you're over water. And do you want to be wearing that? Do you want to have it tucked away and available to you? We're going to talk about, where is the paddle? Because if we have an engine failure and we end up out in the water, we've got to get back to land somehow. There's a lot of little things we're going to talk about, and one of them being, as soon as that engine starts, the aircraft starts to move. So we have to be very aware of what are the obstacles, what's the traffic, what's going to happen immediately. I'll share a humorous story with you. I was flying with someone, just giving a ride to someone in a seaplane who was elderly and told me that they had flown just a couple days before and they were current. And we were flying a J3 Cub. So I'm out on the float and I have to hand prop it. And the building is to the left of us. No big deal. If we go 10 feet forward, we're clear of it. But as soon as I started the engine, the student pushed the left rudder and started going in that direction, and I'm outside the airplane. This is not a joyous moment. So you have to get in there with your hand, push the other rudder, because they just weren't doing it. But you also have to be aware, in a situation like that, can I get to the mags quickly and shut it off? Because we don't want to run into something, especially a dock with people on it, with a running prop. So
Right.
all that is part of our getting in the airplane brief. And even the fact that the floats are slippery, wear the appropriate shoes and be careful, because you don't want to fall off the float. That's an unpleasant way to start any lesson.
All right, very cool. And so, and obviously, the other things you'll do too, and we're going to talk in detail about these coming up, is the taxiing and then the takeoffs and landings, which you've already mentioned. So let's go ahead and we'll keep moving into that next one. Now, one of the big things I know you mentioned early on is that you will learn how to read the wind, probably more than any other kind of flying that you do. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of the types of things you'll learn there?
I'll tell you, this does come into play. I live in a town that has more than 60 lakes, 60 lakes in the town. There's over 700 in my county. And I never really paid attention to it when I was a land plane pilot. But when you become a seaplane pilot, you start noticing there's a glassy band of water on one side of the lake. That's the side that the wind is coming from. It's spilling over the trees, but it's not hitting the water there. So now I automatically know where the wind's coming from, even when it's light. The width, how deep that glassy band is, can tell me how light or strong it is.
Huh.
Then we get into ripples of the water, which are going to be perpendicular to the wind. And when it gets up to about 6 knots, we'll start seeing white streaks in the water that parallel the wind. And then when it gets up to 10, 12 knots, we'll start seeing white caps. So we can really tell a lot about the direction of the wind and the severity of the wind just by looking at the lake from altitude. I'll tell you, the most challenging thing, though, is when you have light and variable winds, because you'll see gray spots on the surface of the water where the wind is hitting it.
Mm-hmm.
It might be going in different directions on different parts of the lake. And that starts to come into play. And I know that seems goofy, but that same thing happens on land when we're on a runway, but we don't have any visual indicators. So this starts telling us, even in a light wind, I might have a rotor coming over a row of trees that parallels the runway, or I may have something that I can anticipate rather than being surprised. And I learned that all from seaplanes, just looking at the surface of the water.
That's really cool. And in fact, there's some other things here mentioned too. And a lot of these notes are coming from that seaplane, the FAA seaplane book. So looking for obviously flags, the smoke, the way it's going. And there's a really cool graph in that seaplane book. It's free. It's on the links there. You can go ahead and download that. And it has this big table right here, which even shows you some of the indications you might see, kind of what Jamie was just describing just from his own experience. And it just shows you, like, you can even start to get an idea of the velocity and what's happening in the various cues that might happen. So check it out in the FAA's seaplane, and it's also ski plane and helicopter with floats handbook. It's a long title. They kind of crammed a bunch in there. So, all right, cool. All right, so what about now? You mentioned a little bit about the startup and taxiing, and I have the diagram here, or the illustration of doing the bilge pump. But anything you want to add on here before we go to the next one about that pre-flight? We talked about moving the seaplane. I think the big one for me in reading, and maybe you can describe it, is that when you've got the plane, if it is already in the water and you're doing your pre-flight, you have to move the entire airplane around because you're on the dock.
If you're on a dock, yeah. If you're on a ramp, you can walk out each float separately. Ideally, like this picture here, it's on a ramp. So, and there's a dolly you can put underneath the rigging and jack it up to put it in the water. But this is the best way to do a pre-flight. And normally we'll walk around and we're checking that all the fasteners are in place and the safety wire is there. Same thing on the floats, because the float is attached to the rigging's attached to the aircraft. We want to make sure all the fasteners are there, nothing is cracked or misshapen, because maybe somebody did land it in really high waves. Water rudders are there at the rear of the float, and believe it or not, for taxiing around, we generally want idle taxiing and plow taxiing. We want the water rudders down. For step taxiing and for takeoff and landing, we want them up. So we want to make sure the rigging is there, that it's all connected properly, and it's not all piled up with seaweed and things that can happen, as we bring it into the ramp, onto the, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The ramp and the ramp. There's two different ramps. But as we bring it in, we want to make sure it's not all fouled with things, because that could be an issue if you go to put your water rudders down or water rudders up and you can't. And just in passing, the reason you don't want to do step taxi or a takeoff or a landing with the water rudders down is because if the water kicks those rudders up, it can punch a hole in the aft end of the floats, and that would be a really bad thing. You would have a disabled water rudder and a leaking float. So knowing where your water rudders is very important.
Right, and I that's really interesting, because I didn't know that when I just read the part about that they could be damaged, but not that idea that it would kick them and even damage the float. So that sounds like bad news.
Even taxiing through reeds and things like that, you have to be careful because you can follow them. And obviously as long as it's running, it won't stop moving. You don't want to be getting out on the float and walking to the aft end and trying to get everything out of it while you're moving. That's not going to be a good thing.
Right. And then on the startup and taxiing, now you've already talked about the safety briefing. You mentioned the part about making sure that folks, understand, especially the water things like life preservers and that sort of stuff. And then there's this part too, while sitting still, that it may rotate to the left.
This is one of the most fascinating things I've ever experienced in a seaplane, and it's so instructional because we all know about left turning tendency, P factor, spiraling slipstream, torque, and when we're at high power and high pitch attitude, we need right rudder to go straight. Well, that's always true. It's just we only notice it when we're at high power, high pitch angle. I was flying with my buddy Ken one day. We were in a J3 Cub on floats, and we're sitting out in this lake after we'd flown there. And it was just an absolutely calm day, and we're working on glassy water landings, which we'll talk about. It's a fascinating thing. But it's absolutely calm, and we're idling 800 RPMs maybe. And as we're sitting there, because there's no wind to weather vane into, the airplane is slowly rotating to the left. And you realize that left turning tendency is always there in a single. It never goes away. But we don't have the friction of rubber on asphalt, so we really see it. And it gets into your way of thinking that it's not just high power, high pitch attitude. It's all the time. I'm going to have to compensate for that, and it may come into play. And it's part of the reason many of the seaplane maneuvers we do go to the left, because we already have left turning tendency working for us. Going to the right makes it harder. For commercial pilots, it's like a chandelle. A chandelle to the left is different than a chandelle to the right. Same concept.
Cool. And now what I want to do is that there's this video that you provided. So I'll play this really quick. Maybe you could just narrate a little bit about what's going on. It's just about maybe a minute long, or not even that. It's like 40
This
seconds
is actually
long.
my buddy Ben at Brown Seaplane Base. Ben is the third generation owner of the place. He's taken a couple of his kids for a ride in the Super Cub. You'll notice one of the other kids is holding onto the tail because you don't want it to drift off into the lake in case it doesn't start. And he's just lightly holding onto the tail, but you can see it's moving a bit. It's floating in the water. And Ben's going through the process. The windsock is just hanging there. This is pretty darn calm. As soon as that propeller turns, the aircraft moves, the water rudders go down, and off we go.
And that is amazing how that engine starts and it just went.
It's immediate. And it's this part right here is so soothing. It's a boat ride that turns into an aircraft flight. But even at that, I need the stick all the way back. I don't want the weight of the engine and the loading of the airplane to drop the floats down. So he's got his stick back as soon as he gets out beyond the building. And it's just, I love it. It's an amazing thing. But those tiny little ripples, that's what you see on a very calm day. There's right. Some wind, but it's different on different parts of the lake.
But this is not glassy water yet, though, because you can still see the ripples. Yeah,
this is not. Glassy water is literally like a mirror. You have no depth perception. Everybody thinks they do. You do not. It's just, you have to trust the system.
Cool. How about on the taxiing and sailing? It's like we got some general notes here, and it gets into the sort of the getting up onto the step that you talked about too. Do you want to just briefly describe what they're going to be learning if they do the taxiing part?
Well, what Ben was just doing there, he started up and he's idle taxiing away. And the two main taxis we use are idle taxi and step taxi. Idle taxi is just what it sounds like. The engine is idling. It's a great time to get ourselves situated in the aircraft, talk about what we're planning to do, let the oil warm up, and maybe, if the wind is coming from the side we're coming off the beach, we're going to slowly taxi to the other side of the lake so we can do our run up, turn, and come back. If we have a long distance to go, we can do a step taxi, which is basically like a takeoff. We've got the stick all the way back. We throttle up with our water rudders up. The nose will rise and then settle, and we relax some back pressure, and we let it come down into a step position. The aircraft will get up onto the step where we only have a foot or two of the float in the water. Then we'll reduce power a bit. We don't want to actually take off, but we can go lickety split across the water very comfortably, holding that attitude. And it's an important attitude because that's the same attitude we're going to have when we add full power and lift off. Unlike land planes, we don't rotate. We just get onto the step into the correct position and just let the airplane fly itself off the water.
And then I imagine somebody out there is probably thinking this question too. It's just, you mentioned the run up, because we're so used to in the land plane, you put the brakes on, do the run. What do you do in the seaplane? How are you doing the run up?
Now, we do get into a place where we've got space in front of us, and we throttle up just like you normally would, 1700-ish RPMs to do your mag checks. But you've got the stick all the way back, and you are moving while you're doing it. You have to prepare for that. You cannot stop. That won't happen. So you don't want to do it while you're near the shore, pointed at the shore. And you certainly want to make sure you don't have an obstacle in front of you. And I will throw something in. You might have a slide about this later on. When we're on the water, the Coast Guard is the authority we have to deal with. We're a boat, and we have to follow the right-of-way rules for boats. But one of the things you want to consider is most recreational boaters, and I don't mean to malign them, they've never read the rules. They don't know what the right-of-way rules are. So just give everybody else lots of space. You don't want to be thinking, well, they're going to move. No, they won't necessarily. So we do that run up and make sure we've got clear space in front of us for quite a distance. And it, like anybody else, once you've done it a bunch, you can get that down to fairly quick. But yeah, you can't hold the brakes.
You got to plan, obviously, yeah. So Dan, we have a question.
Yeah, regarding the step taxi, do you use elevator trim to maintain the step taxi attitude?
I never have. I mean, you use a little bit of trim just to get kind of a happy medium, but you're switching from an idle taxi to a step taxi, and once you come off the water, you're switching into a climb attitude. For myself, I've very rarely used much trim. If it feels really heavy, I'll use some, but I've never trimmed for the taxi. That's just, there's too many attitude changes for me to keep retrimming the airplane.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's just me. I mean, there may be people that disagree. I'm okay with that.
So one of the things I thought was interesting too, is I was, like I said, reading some of the stuff, doing some of the research, there are some performance considerations, including different types of drag. And one of the big things is the directional stability. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit more about some of the things they can expect? Oh, and the weight and balance part kind of blew my mind too. I'd never thought about it in terms of that for a land plane. So you can just tell the audience a little bit about some of the things that are a little different with seaplanes?
Yeah, well, and when we get into the plow taxi, high power, stick all the way back, the CG actually moves because of the way the aircraft is. So that stuff's a little esoteric. I don't want to go too far into that, but we can just go ahead and let go of everything and let the aircraft weather vane into the wind, and that's great. The floats will provide some directional stability to us because of the way they're designed with the keel, and they're trying to help on that. But that's a plus and a minus. It depends if what you're trying to do. One of the interesting things though is, as the wind is an aerodynamic structure that will give us lift, the floats are a hydrodynamic structure that will raise us up out of the water as the speed increases. And they even do provide a certain amount of lift because we have a positive angle of attack as we come out of the water. It's a fascinating thing, and you can study it for the rest of your life, but there's a lot going on there. And I don't think people really do think about that because of the floats. Your center of gravity is lower on the aircraft than it would be in the same aircraft on wheels. I've really experienced this with the AirCam. I owned an AirCam on wheels. I've flown an AirCam on floats. Very different experience. I mean, but those floats will, even in the air, provide a keel effect and kind of keep you on the straight and narrow. The weird thing is sometimes you'll see the ball swinging back and forth a bit, and it just gets some input and it starts swinging. Don't chase it. Just fly straight and life is good.
And then the other thing too I thought was really interesting was that with weight and balance, I just never had thought about it. If you laterally load the airplane, maybe too much fuel in one wing or the other, that means one of those floats is going down farther in the water, and that can cause issues as well.
Yeah, and we're looking at airplanes here that are tandem seating, but if you have side-by-side seating and the person in the
Hell
left
yeah.
seat weighs 150 pounds and the person in the right seat weighs 250 pounds and you have more fuel in the right wing, you're not going to like that experience.
Didn't even think about that. Yeah, so like really I need to think about the loading. Oh wow. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the takeoffs and just that process that happens just in getting ready in general again, because we've got about 15 to 20 minutes left in our normal time, so we want to make sure we can hit these highlights. And of course, to go further into detail, check out the FAA's book. And I know we're going to make the pitch too. Go get that seaplane rating. Go do it. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So
There are, by the way, the Seaplane Pilots Association does have a link for all the known seaplane training facilities in the United States, every state that's got them. So there's probably one in a commutable distance, and you don't even have to go for the certificate. You can just go say, I want to experience this. I want to fly one for an hour. It's awesome. And you will find, as we get into this taxiing and takeoff, we have checklists there. I want to make sure before I start my takeoff run, my water rudders are up, my carb heat is off, the area is clear, there's not a boat or a floating log, or in my case, a gator in the way. You really do want to make sure all that's there. Then you go ahead and start your takeoff run, full power, stick all the way back. It will rise up and then settle down a bit, relax some back pressure, and get that step attitude picture in your head, because that picture is what you want on landing as well. So you'll really pick, this is kind of a weird thing. It's sort of like when you teach power on stalls in a land plane. Find something on the aircraft, the cowl, a rivet, something that really lines up with the horizon when you're on that spot, and that will help you on landings tremendously, because this is very visual. It's not an instrument thing. Most of the time your eyes are outside, and that's part of the thing. We don't have a rotation speed. We get on the step and you wait, and it will continue to build up speed, and you'll just fly off the water. Then you can pitch for your climb. But it's kind of cool. You would like it. I'm telling you, Chris, you would like it.
I'm sure it would. And the interesting thing too that I thought was, as I was reading as well, is that when you get up on the step, because you're getting that float farther out of the water, therefore there's less drag, and that's why the airplane can accelerate, and that's why you need to get on the step.
Yeah, people have, by the way, there have been people who have like jumped into a seaplane. I'm going to take off, and you can go full throttle, but if you don't know how to get it on the step, you're not leaving the water. You're just going to taxi really fast until you hit something.
That would be bad. And then the other part was that there's that warning too, that avoid taking off or landing downwind. And in fact, you said don't even. That's like a big thing you just generally do not do.
I'm lucky. I almost entirely do this in lakes in Central Florida, so it's kind of the miniature golf of seaplane flying, and I really enjoy it. But a river where there's a current, I have to think about that. Which way am I going? And I never land downwind, because the hulls have the float has a hull speed. So I have to add whatever wind I have plus my airspeed. If that exceeds my hull speed, when I touch down, the aircraft could invert, turn upside down. I don't want to be upside down in the water. So I can do a crosswind landing, and there's a technique for that. But generally, I really want to be into the wind. I mean, directly into the wind, unless there's some compelling reason I can't.
Yep. Cool. All right, and then here is a video. I may jump a bit through it because this one is, let's see, well, it's about, but it just shows that this is actually you right there in an Icon A5. So I'll just go ahead and start playing it. Maybe you can narrate for us as we go here.
I really like the Icon A5. I was lucky enough to know some people who worked there and got to fly them early on. It's a neat airplane. It uses the Rotax 912, so it's 100 horsepower. It doesn't leap off the water. It takes a pretty good long run, and I'm a fat boy. I weigh 235, so it takes some time, but it's incredibly simple to fly. It's very much like a Cub in that. It's a very docile aircraft. You'll see there, you really are on the step. There's still spray coming out the back, but now you're really getting more aerodynamic than hydrodynamic, and then it will just lift off and very smooth. It's just all of a sudden you're airborne, and it's a wonderful thing. There you are. Now we're in the air.
And off he goes. All right, cool. I'll go ahead and pause it there because I think that's shows the main part, but it showed all that water spray and then on the step as well. So pretty cool. And then in fact, you've already talked about this, which is all good. This is just that visual representation of, again, you mentioned getting the pitch attitude, but I noticed in the seaplane book as well, maybe you can talk a little bit about, it's because the water, you have to also have some kind of visual reference to know if you're moving sideways or sort of keeping yourself. Can you describe like what the process is there?
Well, it's, I'll go to teaching steep turns in a land plane. One of the things I'll have people do is before you enter the steep turn, what catches your eye out here in front of you? That's now your reference point. I don't want you looking at the DG while we're doing a steep turn. I want you just looking outside, watching the horizon. And when you see that reference point coming up, you know where to roll out. Very similar with a seaplane. And it doesn't matter how far away the other shore is. Pick something out when you're heading straight into the wind so that you maintain your heading. You don't want to be wandering and kind of dancing left and right as you go. And if you do that, it makes everything easier. You've got a focal point to shoot for. You've got your pitch attitude. And of course, in this case, wind is coming from your right side. You have to keep a little bit of right aileron in. So you do not want wind to get under that wing and lift it up. That gets excessively exciting, should we say?
And Dan, you got a follow-up question?
Yeah, actually, there's a series of questions that came through about the difference of a float plane versus an Icon or Lake Amphibian with the hull. And then it was a great way to sum it up. Craig came in and said, yeah, please note that the flying of floats is very different than flying boats, but the check ride and rating is the same. So I thought that was just an interesting way. So I'm not sure if there's much more to add on there other than the fact that, yeah, flying them is very differently, but the check ride, the rating is the same.
I'll give you an example, and I think we're going to go ahead. Glassy water, we're going to come up on. If you're flying a float plane, two floats, the glassy water technique is going to help us get in the air faster. And it is the fastest way to get in the air because once we get on the step, we're going to go a little bit left stick and pick the right float up out of the water. And left turning tendency again. We go left unless there's some compelling reason not to. That means we've just got part of one float in the water, just the step on that one float, much less dragging when we come off. On a flying boat like the Icon or a Grumman Goose or something like that, you can't do that. There's a technique, but you're just in the water with the hull.
Right.
So there are some differences, and like any other, if you switch from a Cessna 172 to a Mooney, you have to do transition training. The same thing is true in seaplanes. If you go from Legend Cub on floats to an Icon A5, you need to go get some instruction in the Icon A5. It's the same certificate, but it's a different procedure. So you've got to be up on that.
Very cool. And in fact, I thought was interesting too with the glassy water, which I believe, no, we don't have it. It was just here. The glassy water too is that there's almost like because there's not the little ripples or whatever, it creates almost like a suction on the float, which is why you had to do that part with lifting one out. Is that why the one float comes out?
Yeah, there is. It's not actually a suction, but it's the water's sticky. There's nothing breaking it up, so it's harder to get off the water. By lifting one float up, we can cut our drag in half, and it just gets the aircraft accelerates better and lifts off. I will say that one of the things I enjoy most, and I mentioned the airplane spinning to the left when we were working on glassy water landings. Glassy water is fairly treacherous for pilots because it is an absolute mirror, and everybody's seen that. You've gone out to a lake in the morning, you got your coffee, and it's just dead calm, and it's beautiful, and you can see the reflection of the trees on the water. It's postcard stuff, but you don't have any depth perception. So there's a very specific technique where before you cross over the last bit of physical stuff you can see, and that might be a sandbar or reeds in the water or a brush line at the water's edge, we want to get into our attitude before we pass that last visual reference. And then we'll bump in a little bit of power and we just wait. We hold that attitude. You don't seek out the water. You don't adjust the power. You just wait. And you are slowly coming down, slowly coming down. It does take space. But the great thing is when you finally touch the water, you hear it. You don't feel it. It's an amazing thing. It's just, and you're on the water, then retard the throttle, stick back is what we refer to as brakes because you get the back end of the floats in. It's wonderful. If you don't have a good blah, blah, last visual reference. You land as close to the shoreline as you can, and you key off the shoreline. But you do the same thing. You get an attitude in a power setting, and you wait. If you seek it out, you will undoubtedly touch down nose low. The front of those floats are going to grab on, or the front of the hull in a boat type, and it's just going to want to dive under. You really have to trust the system.
And it's interesting hearing you say that, where you come down and it's just that experience, because like glider's almost the opposite. It's quiet except for the wind noise, and when you touch down,
Rumble.
it's like, well, I'm back on Earth.
Oh, it's great.
bumpy and loud.
You don't have to ask your instructor if you did it right. You'll know.
All right, let me just back up a couple here. Maybe it's some you've kind of talked already about the flying over for the pre-landing. So maybe we should make sure we didn't miss anything here, because I'm just trying to watch our time. We got about 10 minutes in our time left here, so just checking for obstacles. And you've already mentioned the part about looking for, you said flying over and just making sure that everything's clear. So I don't think we've got anything here. And you already mentioned the brakes. That's the pulling back right on the stick. So I think we're good on that one. And then the landings themselves, maybe just really briefly, I just thought this was interesting because I'd never thought of it. We have ground loops if you're flying a tail wheel. I guess really if you do a tricycle gear really badly, you could also ground loop. But what about this water loop thing?
Yeah, if you were to let a crosswind get under a wing, or you're talking about where we're loaded incorrectly and one side is much heavier than the other, and the wind got under that wing, if the wingtip digs in, that's a lot of resistance. It will spin right around, and you very much can damage the airplane. And I don't want to scare anybody off. It's a remarkable experience. I have loved seaplane flying. It really is the highlight of my flying career. I think it's fantastic. But learning the techniques, and just like a land plane, I mean, if you're going into Cedar Key with a 2,000-foot runway, you really better be on the game with your short field landing. Because if you touch down halfway down and you have weak brakes, that's not going to work out. So it really is, for instance, the rough water takeoff and landing is very analogous to an unimproved field, a rough,
Soft field
takeoff and landing. I'm sorry. For the takeoff, we want to do everything normal, but we hold our pitch attitude as we speed up a little bit higher than normal, because we want to get into the air early on ground effect. And we'll just hold 5 feet above the surface and level off a bit, build up speed, then we'll climb out. On the way back, when we're coming into land, let's say we've got that lake that's 2 miles across and we're on the south side, the wind's coming from the north. The waves get bigger as they go down the lake. We don't want to land in the heaviest surf. We want to go ahead and pick our touchdown point. And that's one of the great things about seaplane. I might have a 2 mile wide lake. I can make my touchdown point wherever I want it to be. So I can make it in the first half of the lake or the first third of the lake where the waves are much smaller. I'm not going to beat up the aircraft or myself as much. And I'm going to come in with flaps if I've got an airplane with flaps, and I'm going to just get it on the ground, on the water, and get the brakes on. But I'm kind of doing it in the same way as I do a soft field, where I carry a little bit of power, so I've got some lift. And as soon as I feel it touch the surface, power off, brakes on. And that kind of keeps me from beating the tar out of myself, let's say.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right. Okay. So let's see. Let's go ahead, and I think we talked about glassy water. We've just got I think basically looks like 2 topics left. Number 1, the post-flight procedure. So now that you've made your landing, and there's the different types that you'll learn about when you do that training, tell us a little bit about the process. And there's various ways. It's not just one. It's like, normally we land, we take it over and tie it down or stick it in a hangar. What's the differences with a seaplane?
Well, my preference is to go to a ramp or the beach. You might be going to a dock, or you might be going to a mooring buoy, but you want to be going into the wind if at all possible, because you've got more control there. And of course, this has the 3H checklist. I've always liked this because I particularly like Cubs and Super Cubs, where you've got the clamshell doors that open up. Before we get anywhere near the ramp or the beach, I want my headset off, my harness off, the hatch open, because if something should happen, I don't want to be tethered to the aircraft. I want to be able to get out and get clear. We do want to, this is a great picture, by the way, of the Super Cub coming up to a dock. They've got to be really planning this, because there's boats there, there's people there, you've got a spinning propeller. You don't want to pull up to the dock or the beach or the ramp with a running propeller. It's a dangerous thing. So we have to plan it all out enough and have just enough inertia that we can kill the mags before we get where we're going, and we'll just drift in. Another good reason to know where the paddle is, because you might misjudge that sometimes.
That's a
But yeah,
lot of
those
planning.
things are real. You know, that's a real thing. And there are places where there are mooring buoys. And you have to know, you know, in a Super Cub or a J3 where the hatch is on the right side, I need to have that buoy just outside the right float so that I can grab it as I go by and attach to it. And then somebody will send out a tender to pick me up in a little boat and take me to shore. But yeah, each one of those is part of your check ride. How do you do this? You're going to have to demonstrate the ability, because if you can fly it but you can't get it back to shore, that's a problem.
All right, and then the last bit before we have Dan pop back in to we'll close out and then do our questions, is this why fly seaplanes? We'll get back to that question again. And you mentioned this thing down at Jack Brown's where you did some instruction too. There's this seaplane pirate community, but I think that goes beyond that, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Francis Brown, who was married to John Brown, who ran Brown's for years and years, referred to us all as seaplane pirates, because we're kind of, you know, professional pilots. We do this for a living, but we wear shorts and t-shirts and flip-flops or Crocs, and we don't look like professional pilots. We look like kind of airport bums, but that's the appropriate thing. And these are some smart, capable people. You know, every seaplane instructor I've ever met has been absolutely top-notch. And I don't know if you've got a slide on this, but I'll throw it out there. I live in Florida, and seaplane flying is a year-round thing here, and there are a number of places that you can go, Jones Brothers or Browns or whatever. But people come here from the Maldives to learn to fly, because there's one airport in Maldives for an island nation. People come from Alaska and learn how to fly so they can go up there. And many of the instructors here go up and fly a season or two in Alaska so they can have that bush flying experience. Just because you learn in a J3 Cub or an Icon A5 or a 172 on floats in lakes under calm conditions, that's the same as becoming a sport pilot or a private pilot. You've got the qualifications now to go off and learn how to be really good at this. And that's the bragging rights part. I mean, you have a skill set that other people just don't have.
And then, of course, as you've mentioned too, and you can tell from your passion, Jamie, that it obviously sounds like it's a ton of fun as well, and for the folks that you get to hang around with. Well,
And there's
let's
one
go.
other thing that I'll throw in that I'm great. We rarely get above 500 feet when we're doing training. So if there's 700 overcast, we're going. You know, whereas if I'm at the FBO flying for 141 school, I'm waiting for the ceiling to get up to a couple thousand. Seaplane pilots get to go. It's fantastic.
Very cool. One little bonus thing is we did have one of our audience members or whatever that emailed us to let us know that they are an instructor and just wrote a new book. As he described it, Bill Young emailed this and just said this was the book that he wished he had when he was going through his seaplane training. So if you want to check it out, it's not available just yet, but it should be available later this month. Which and I put this information on the handout as well. So to be this is, as we're speaking, this is May in 2025. So he said by the end of May is when ASA says they'll put this out. So if you're curious, check it out and see if it's something you might enjoy.
I will
All right.
throw out the oddity that seaplane flying is geographic specific. I wrote a course for Gleim years ago about seaplane flying, and I intentionally did not mention gators, which are a big thing here. There's gators all over. And I got some feedback from a woman in Alaska who was very unhappy that I hadn't included anything about bears when you're beaching.
I don't know which is worse, honestly. They both sound pretty bad. All right, Dan, you want to tell us a little bit about AOPA membership for those that may not be members already?
Absolutely. So the AOPA Foundation works hand in hand with AOPA, and together we provide answers and solutions and tools that'll help make the most of your aviation journey so we can help you fly more affordably, fly safer, and better protected, have even more fun flying. We can help keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in general aviation. And as the world's largest aviation community, AOPA has a very strong voice through aviation advocacy. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing to protect and promote the freedom to fly here in the United States. But imagine if all the pilots were AOPA members. Imagine how much influence we could get done. So to join or to learn more about AOPA, AOPA Foundation is linked there. Please visit aopa.org/membership.
All right, as we come to the official quote unquote end, because we are going to stick around, Jamie's willing to stick around and help us answer questions. But as we come to our official end, we just want to mention number one, if you were here for your wings credit, that's what you were looking for as well. I think Stephen will put the link back up. It's like you will get that automatically as long as you use the email that is matches up with your FAA safety account. But if you're not sure, Stephen will put the link in the chat, I believe, or in the questions, so you can see that. And that's a place where you can go and submit into the form where he will double check it. But if you've gotten it before and you use the same email, you're going to be good to go. So no worries. As you can see, next episode is going to be different. We're not going to do it on a Thursday because it happens to be a federal holiday that day. We're going to be on Wednesday, June 18th, 12 to 1 Eastern as usual. And our topic is going to be there and back again. I don't know if you'll get that little reference there for anybody who might be a fan of sort of like the fantasy genre, but GA to pro to GA journey. So it's going to be one of our new folks here, one of our new team members at AOPA, Mary, is going to join me, and we're going to talk about our experiences from going from general aviation to becoming a pro pilot and then coming back again, and just some of the things that we learned about that. So as always, if you have any ideas for future topics or things you would like to see, in fact, this episode today was brought to you by that because we had requests for learning about seaplanes, which is why I ended up kind of cajoling Jamie and say, hey, Jamie, would you come on and talk about seaplanes? Because I know that you have lots of experience in that. So let us know at ftinitiative@aopa.org. Just email us and give us ideas for things that you might like to see. That said, I think, Dan, it is time for questions. What do you have for us? As I know I saw a bunch happening there. And yes, Chris, he mentions The Hobbit, by the way. Good call on that there I'm back again. It's a Hobbit's holiday.
There you go. Great questions came through. First one early on came from Sherman. Jamie, you've done a great job talking about, observing conditions while you're in the air, see which direction, strength of the wind, things like that. But are there ATIS options to fly to specific lakes, or how do you get reports for water conditions? Does anything like that exist?
You know, in my experience, it's really up to you. There is an airport here in Florida, Leesburg, which terrific airport, Towered Airport. It's right next to Lake Harris, which is a very large lake. I do call the tower to tell them I'm landing in the lake, and they clear me my own discretion. And then when I taxi up onto the ramp, then I contact ground to taxi, but they won't give me any information about the water conditions or anything. And I think that's just because in most places, it's really not in their view, and the other boaters are not within their control. So it'll be very much like, if you go someplace where services are unavailable and they say landing at your own risk, that's kind of the situation.
Gotcha. We had a note from Yuri, who is a airplane single engine land pilot. Would learning to land seaplanes help for understanding emergency bailing to land an airplane in a body of water? So experience an emergency for a land airplane, would getting a seaplane rating help with that?
It wouldn't hurt. I mean, the impact is going to be a little different, but the basics, seriously, of getting down low over the water, kind of like a rough water landing or a glassy water landing, where you're getting into a position and maybe carrying a little power and then pulling the power off and pitching up so that you touch down at the lowest possible speed. That's very similar. So there would be some crossover on that, I think. Although I sincerely hope, Yuri, you never have to do that in an airplane with wheels.
We all hope that, absolutely. A question from August. How will a seaplane rating affect my insurance or my flying club's insurance? So I wonder, is there any gain there? Sorry, I've got a little fly that just came buzzing through my screen. Any insurance impact of gaining that experience?
In my experience, the more training you have, the better it is on your insurance rates. Now, if you buy a seaplane, that's a different thing. And if you buy an amphibian, those are the highest rates generally. But more training means you're a better, more serious pilot with a better knowledge base. So it's it's either going to have no effect or it'll have a slight downward effect on the cost.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
So how about, and I think this was, I'm going to assume this was related to amphibs, but what is it like landing on a paved runway? Maybe talk a little bit about that experience on an amphibious aircraft.
It's kind of interesting. In the case of something like an Icon A5, it's a tricycle gear airplane. No big deal. A Buccaneer, that's a tail dragger now when you touch down, or the air cam on floats, or we gave away a Super Cub on floats, amphibious floats a few years ago that I got to fly around for a while, which was pretty great. It's like landing a shopping cart because you have four wheels. It's really easy when you're on land, and it's very comfortable. So they're all different depending on the type of aircraft and whether it's tricycle gear or four wheels or whether it's a tail dragger, but it's very familiar.
Cool.
I guess the sight picture is a little higher though, huh?
Yeah, it is weird that you're in a float plane. It is weird that you're sitting up that much higher, but
yeah.
Russell asks for your opinion of the value for money proposition of a prepaid 8 or 10 hour week-long add-on program versus maybe just chipping away at it. Any thoughts on that, Jamie?
very often you can get preferential pricing if you're buying a block time, like 8 or 10 hours. Training is to proficiency. One of the things I've seen that people kind of get themselves in a box is they're not really current and they want to finish in 5 hours. And 5 hours is an arbitrary number. That's a good average. But if you're not current, that's going to be a problem. Having that block time where you're just committing yourself to saying, yeah, I'm going to spend 8 or 10 hours at that. That increases the likelihood of you completing it with being comfortable and competent. You don't really want to go into your check ride nervous thinking, gee, I hope I can do this. That extra couple hours really is worth it. And in all honesty, I learned way more about seaplane flying when I was instructing in seaplanes than I was first flying seaplanes and getting my certificate. And I'm lucky they would let me take an airplane and everything, but when you really get into it and start teaching anything, you start getting better at it. And it makes all the difference in the world. So yeah, I'll go for the extra time every time.
Cool. We had a viewer mention that he or she got their airplane single engine seaplane on a commercial license last year. Do you think adding multi-engine C would be worthwhile or helpful? And I wonder, where are you going to find one of those?
Well, there are seaplane operators that do operate them. I do not have a multi-engine C. I've seriously thought about it. When I had the air cam, I was intending to put it on floats. And then the FAA said, no, you can't do ratings in an experimental. So I sold the air cam and then they reversed themselves and you could get it. But no, I think if you want to be a professional, I think having the multi-engine C is absolutely worthwhile. And I'll give you an example. If you're in New York City and Manhattan, one of the most crowded places in America, and you jump in a cab and go to the end of 23rd Street, there's a marina there and there's seaplane activity. And people who have homes out on the Hamptons, they get out of their office on Friday afternoon, they go down there, they fly to their home in the Hamptons. On Monday morning, they fly back. If it's IFR, they land at LaGuardia. If it's VFR, they land in the river, take you right to the 23rd Street dock, jump in a cab. That's true in many cities. It's true in the Bahamas. It's true down in the Keys. There are a lot of opportunities for people who want to fly seaplanes, and having a multi-engine ticket is always beneficial beyond the single engine.
Cool. Is there a solo requirement for seaplane flying?
Solo?
Mm-hmm.
No, there is not. And that's generally not something you'll even see. Most people who add seaplane certificates only occasionally do it. One of the things we see here is commercial pilots, transport guys who are have layovers in Tampa or Orlando will come down just to fly for an hour. And I've done that many times with charter pilots or airline pilots or even military pilots who have the certificate but haven't done it in a few years. But no, there's no solo. It's all dual.
Okay. Roger mentioned that our neighbors to the north often strap an external load like a canoe to the floats or underneath the airplane. Is this a hazardous practice inherently?
Not if done correctly. And Alaska does have completely different rules for external loads because it's essential there. There are many towns in a place like Alaska, and Canada has entirely different rules as well. But there are many places in Alaska where the roads don't go from one town to another. You're going to fly or you're going to walk. So external loads are a normal thing there, but there's still regulations that control it. And the people who do it are very cautious because nobody wants to end up in the trees.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you touched on this earlier that when you're on the water, you're a boat
A boat.
and subject to those rules and regulations. And that's what this was about. Was with regard to right of way, is a seaplane considered a motor vessel, which I think you would agree is, which
It
means
is.
you'd give way to sailboats, etc.
I give way to everybody. And I think that's, under the be a good neighbor policy, I think that's the way to go. Not all of those boaters know the right of way rules, and not all of them are really paying close attention. And there was a video, I don't know, maybe a year ago, of a seaplane that hit a boat, and it was unfortunate. Nobody was killed, but it's a bad day. So I just assume nobody knows to get out of my way because they don't really know the performance capabilities of the aircraft. So I just let them all go. I'll wait as long as I have to wait, or I'll reposition myself so I've got a clear takeoff or landing lane.
Mm-hmm.
But I never want to compete with a boat. Sailboat, canoe, fishermen, I don't care. I want to stay well away from them.
Mm-hmm. I used to live in Central Florida and saw a lot of those Jack Browns and other seaplanes flying around when I was down on my boat. And oftentimes I'd see an airplane coming in on approach, and then you'd see a jet ski or a boat try to get in on the fun. Is that an experience that you had, and how do you handle that situation? And
I've
normally
only
it's
had
a
it
race,
happen a
right?
couple
They're like
times.
looking to race.
Yeah, I've only had it a couple times, and I'm happy to go around and go to another lake.
Yeah.
They mean
Clay,
no harm, but that doesn't mean something bad won't happen. I
right,
just don't need to be a part of it.
right. And a distraction, unnecessary distraction for sure, for everyone involved. Clay is a single and multi-engine seaplane pilot. Any recommendations on reaching insurability thresholds? What's the best way to build time?
Oh, well, if you're professional, if you've got a commercial, Chris and I were talking about this the other day. Your CFI certificate is predicated on your commercial. So if you have a commercial seaplane add-on, you are a seaplane instructor. If you can instruct in seaplanes, if you have a way of doing that, that's a great way to build up time. There are a number of charter services that fly caravans on floats and beavers and that other one I can't think of. But you might be able to get a gig flying right seat for some of those and get to log some second in command time and occasional pilot in command time. You'll certainly learn a lot, but that will help you build up the time. In my experience, I've always been most successful just buying something and fly it to get to where I want to be. It has worked out for me because generally, if you maintain an aircraft, it's worth what you paid for it or more later. So it's always worked out for me.
Good advice. Thank you. Thomas is a lucky duck. He has won a seaplane training raffle and was supposed to get certified this month, but it's been postponed due to bad weather. How heavily does weather impact takeoff landing conditions? How rough is too rough on the water?
I have the benefit of when I've flown at Browns, they kind of have a threshold. It's right around 14, 15 knots. Let's call it, because it becomes uncomfortable. You can damage the aircraft, and we don't absolutely have to do this. Weather is a factor for anything that flies, and I err on the side of the conservative. And this is, I wanted a tail dragger sign off at one point, so I bought a Cub. And I did get signed up for a tail dragger in 2.8 hours. I mean, I just kind of had a knack for it. But I gave myself a maximum of 10 knots of wind within 30 degrees of runway alignment. And I figured I'll gain confidence through that and maybe widen it or maybe narrow it. But that's a starting point. I would do the same thing in seaplanes. Key off your instructor, take advice from them. But if you have any question that is this too rough, don't go, because it could get rougher while you're gone.
Cool. Donald had a question about landing technique, and you had talked through your scenarios. You always had power on coming down. Do you ever do a power off landing in a seaplane?
A normal landing is pretty much power off, but I carry power until I'm in the round out. Then I pull it off. But I need to be low because you've got a lot of extra weight and a lot of extra drag, and you do not want to stall a seaplane 4 feet in the air. So the rough water landing and the glassy water landing both have you carrying power. Normal landing doesn't necessarily have you carrying power. I prefer it. I'd rather have a couple hundred extra RPMs in there. It just cushions it and it keeps me from getting into that mushy thing. Because especially Cubs, Chris, as you know, you've flown these things.
Mm-hmm.
It does get, when you get slow enough, it does get kind of mushy and you don't want to get surprised by a stall. So I just, that's personal preference. I just prefer carrying a little bit of power. And by the way, you will never bust a check ride because you carried 200 RPMs into the landing.
Right. And then one interesting thing too, I remember just from, again, for me just reading the book, which is on the handout for everybody, it talked too about, and I'm sure Jamie knows this as well, is that carrying that power is critical. And I think of in the glassy water, even the rough, because you don't know if you've kind of touched and then you're back up in the air again. And so you don't want to stall, like you just said, so that can lead to that. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, the only time I've ever done a full-on power off landing is for a simulated engine failure. And then you have to, and that is part of the check. You're going to do a simulated engine failure. Surprise.
Mm-hmm. Robert entered a comment that was pretty common coming through here, is concerned about the cost. The general understanding is that it could cost a fair bit to get a seaplane rating. Any recommendations to get that at a reasonable cost?
In all honesty, the cost is the cost. You can shop around. The biggest factor is going to be what type of equipment are you flying? Are you in a Cub or a Legend Cub or a Super Cub? If you're going to fly a Beaver, you're going to spend some money. So it really is about finding a place that's convenient to you, or, it's part of the reason people do so much training in Florida, even to get their private single engine land. People will take vacation and fly here for 4 weeks and get the certificate. People will do that for the seaplane as well. So find some place that you're willing to go, that has aircraft and instructors that you have confidence in, and a price point that you can manage. But it's really going to be mostly dependent on the type of aircraft you're flying. So if you're flying that DC-3 on floats, that's going to be a pricey one. And if you can find somebody doing a 172 or a Super Cub, it's going to be more affordable.
Yeah. And I think like that frequency of training as well, I think is probably as evident in seaplane flying as any other. The more you do it, the more you're going to retain from lesson to lesson. So you're not having to relearn or brush back up on skills if you're flying, say, once every couple of weeks or once a month. It's going to take quite a while, and in the end, more money.
Well, the schedule very often, the places I've flown is typically if you come out to get your single engine, private or commercial, we're going to do ground school for an hour or so early in the morning. We're going to do a flight for a couple hours right after that. We're going to have a break for lunch because you do need a break. We're going to do another flight later in the day for a couple hours. You're going to go home, chair fly, study, memorize checklists, come back. We're going to do a flight early in the morning, and hopefully you're right around 5 hours there. If you were current, I'm probably in a good position to sign you off. If you need another flight, we have time to do that. But it's typically a 2 to 3 day deal, even for weather, it works generally, but it's not spread out like a private, unless you're getting your initial in it.
Mm-hmm. Cliff had asked about angle of attack indicators. Is it common for seaplanes to have angle of attack indicators to help with aircraft attitude?
The Icon A5 does, and you fly the Icon A5 off the AOA. You don't even look at the airspeed indicator. You just put the indicator where you need it to be. You fly off the water, same thing for landing. Most seaplanes do not, but it is very visual. And that's when I was talking earlier about find something on the cowl, on a strut, something that lines up with the horizon that puts you in that step attitude. There's very little reason to look at the panel in a seaplane. It's almost entirely outside.
Gotcha. Thomas asked about single magneto idle. Anything to talk about there?
Some people do that. I do not. because that means one set of plugs, and I'm an MP, so I have a position on this. If you're on one mag, one set of plugs isn't firing, but you've got combustion gases going. Those plugs could be loading up. You might be creating a bigger problem than you're solving. I do aggressively lean when I'm on the ground, land plane or seaplane, to prevent loading up, because most Lycomings, Continentals, air-cooled engines, at idle, they're using extra fuel to cool the engine, so it's a very rich mixture. I don't need it to be that rich, and if I'm only at 800 or 1,000 RPMs, I can lean out pretty aggressively to prevent that. But no, I never do one mag idling. I think it's more trouble than it's worth.
Okay. Alton noticed that in the illustrations there were not flaps used noted in that. Is that a normal part of seaplane flying, is using flaps as you would on land?
If you have flaps, you use them, but there are a lot of airplanes. J3 Cubs were the go-to seaplane trainer for decades, and they don't have flaps. So, if you've got them, you use them. If you don't have them, you don't use them. For the Super Cub, you do use flaps, absolutely. I mean, it's just, you go with what you got.
Mm-hmm. I think I know where you're going to take this answer, but Larry lives in Colorado, and is, very realistic situation is that there's not an opportunity to fly to lakes in Colorado. So is getting a seaplane rating makes sense for someone that lives in a region like that?
I know this is an odd perspective, but this is legitimately my way of looking at it. It's a remarkable experience that's worth having, because it's a couple days, 3 days of some really interesting flying with some interesting people. You're going to learn some skills and have some insight into how the aircraft performs, how the wind affects you, that you can take in the future. Even the energy management of being in an aircraft that doesn't have brakes and you have to plan ahead. To me, that all has value. So if you really enjoy flying and you want to be better at it and have a more well-rounded body of knowledge, it's absolutely worth it, even if you never get to do it again. But if it's something you have a chance of doing again, well, great. Maybe you end up moving to Florida like all the really good people do. And at some point down the road, you become current again, because you can show up and go, oh, I have my rating. And that is common at the seaplane base. We get people like, I haven't flown seaplanes in 10 years, but I want to take another whack at it. Great. And just like, when we teach Rusty Pilot, as soon as the wheels leave the ground, people who haven't flown in 30 years go, I remember this. I got this. It comes back very quickly.
And I'll just add on to that too, because I know Jamie and I talked about this when we were planning. I've not done the seaplane stuff, but from gliders, and it's like, and even though I did my glider training, I really haven't had the opportunity to do that since. But those things, especially, I remember the rope break and the emergency turn and all that kind of stuff, really sunk into me, and it affected the way that I fly powered airplanes. So that's those similar kinds of things. The things that I learned from it affected everything else, and so I can attest to the fact that that is true. Doing these other kinds of trainings, even if you don't end up doing that on a regular basis, I think will make you a better pilot.
Cool.
Very long way of saying yes, but it's true.
Do it.
Thorough answer. That's good. Is getting a seaplane rating, does that count as a biannual flight review?
Oh yeah, it's an add-on. So you have a check ride. It does count as a flight review, and I've done it as a flight review, and I've done it to renew my CFI. I've gone and taken a check ride again in a seaplane. It's worth it. It's a different thing. Not to go off on a tangent, but there's a couple different perspectives on this. Some people think you should always fly what you regularly fly. I've done my flight reviews and CFI check rides in singles, twins, seaplanes, tail draggers, anything I can get. Steerman, I'll go do it because I'm going to learn something out of that experience, and that's going to make me safer down the road. So yeah, it does count as a biennial flight review, and I'm sorry, just a flight review. It's not biennial.
Yeah.
I'm very old. I still slip back into that. But if that's the initiative that says, you know what, this really is worth it because I knock out a requirement and I do something really enjoyable that expands my potential, go for it.
Cool. Jamie, Darius wants to know about the realities of renting a seaplane, float plane versus just doing an add-on? What are the realities for that?
There are some places that rent seaplanes. Obviously, you have to check out with them and you have currency requirements to continue renting them. There's some not too far from here. There's also some clubs, flying clubs that operate around seaplanes. They're less common, but in all honesty, you could form a club around a seaplane if you wanted to, or even do a co-ownership, 2, 3, 4 people who are involved in the same seaplane, because you're not flying cross country in it generally. You're flying it for fun and proficiency and to share the joy with somebody else. But by doing that, whether that's renting or starting or joining a club or doing a co-ownership, most people call partnership, you can cut the cost way down. And now you have access to an aircraft you actually have confidence in.
Cool. Jamie, I think you've made a fan here today and perhaps a student pilot as well. Marvin wants to know, where are you instructing?
I used to instruct at Jack Brown Seaplane Base right here in Winter Haven, Florida, proven by science to be the greatest town in the world. But I don't routinely instruct there anymore. Just because this is a little known nuance, but Dan is my boss and he really doesn't let me leave the office much. So I don't get to do that as much as I did, but I still go over there and I think it's the greatest place. That's where I got my certificate, and there are many, many good places, and the Seaplane Pilots Association guide can tell you what your options are. But whether you're up at Goodspeed on the Connecticut River in Connecticut, or whether you're down here or go to Jones Brothers, which is up Leesburg, there's so many good places. You can get a heck of an education and you will have a great time.
As a disclaimer to our viewers, Jamie has said hundreds of things that are perfectly accurate and correct, but the one about me not letting him out of his office was false in its entirety. But just want to make sure we're all on the same page there. Gary was talking about glassy water, not as flying seaplanes, but as a CFI and flying over glassy water near a runway that had noticed the glassy water, felt like he was low, his student was low, and then, because that's what the student was cueing in on, was that, and that mirror effect got him, and they were in fact extremely low, were able to correct. So that was an eye-opener for him and his student about the effects of glassy water, even when they weren't flying in a float plane or a seaplane.
You know, one thing, that mirror effect is not a joke. Depending on what time of day and how you're positioned, you could get glare off that water that's really difficult to deal with. True in a land plane too. So it's worth understanding.
I think Michael answered his own question here, but it was about giving way to other watercraft on the water. He says, how do you do that? You circle in place?
Well, you can idle taxi. You're moving very slowly with your water rudders down. You do have the ability to steer around. And I can always step taxi to another place. I can just wait if they're crossing across, or if there's somebody who's just, you know, 2 party boats are hanging out, I reposition myself so I have a takeoff lane that doesn't impinge on them. But yeah, I mean, it's a situation by situation condition. You have to read it, and you know, there's usually a way around it, but I just don't want to be thinking, yeah, I'll probably get in the air before I get to them. That's not a good way to go.
We should make it.
Right. My hard and fast rule, if you flying anything anywhere, if in your pre-flight planning you find yourself saying, yeah, this will probably work, that's a hard no.
That's great. We've got time for one more, and I think I've got a great one to finish on. Brian had mentioned, any insights on the awkward feeling of raising one float first and the unequal drag?
It's a really neat thing. I love it. What you have to watch is that you don't put in too much roll and dig a wingtip in. So you do have to be cautious of it. You're getting that right float just out of the water, but boy, you can feel it when the drag goes away, and it's just a wonderful feeling. And I don't know if you've ever done this, Chris, but I certainly have, to demonstrate proficiency and precision to a student who's having trouble landing. I might come in and land on just the left main and slow down and then put down the right main and then slow down and put down the nose wheel. It's very much the same thing. You want to have really good control, but that's why I say it really is visual. You're looking out and you've got the stick, your feet are on the rudders, your hands on the throttle, you're really feeling it more than you do in most other aircraft. It's very much a sensory experience. It's not reading the gauges.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Very cool. Good. That is it.
All right.
Well, thanks, guys.
let's-
I had a great time.
Well, we appreciate you being on, Jamie. We want to thank you for taking the time to do this with us. Don't forget for the audience, our next episode, Wednesday, not our normal Thursday, June 18th, 12 to 1 Eastern, there and back again, GA to Pro to GA Journeys. Again, Jamie Beckett, one of our folks down in Florida, working remotely. I was going to say today, but like all the time he gets to work remotely. So I'm really glad you're here with us. Thank you, Dan and Steven and Chris on the back end, helping us out with questions. Just want to thank you all for your time and appreciate you being here. So we will see you next time. Make sure you guys fly safe.